All right, so hello everyone. My name is Karen Herrera, and all right. Hello everyone. My name is Karen Herrera. I'm the Parent Center Advocate, and alongside me is Kim. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yep, I'm Kim Madden. I'm the Director of Family Support at Advocates for Children.
Right. And so today we will be talking about the middle school and high school admissions process for students with disabilities. But before we begin, I wanted to give you all a brief overview of who we are. So AFC is an independent agency that protects the rights of all New York City students. We have a variety of resources, such as our helpline, which is open Monday through Thursday from 10 to 4. The number is right there. We also offer a language access line for parents whose preferred language is not English. We also offer free legal services to low-income families, as well as guides and resources on our website, workshops and trainings just like this one, and finally, policy advocacy and impact litigation. So this year we've updated our website. It's mobile friendly. And like I just mentioned, we have guides and resources on our website. You can find those in the resource tab, such as, if you need some tips going into an IEP meeting, we have a tip sheet, or, a guide on suspension hearings or impartial hearings. To walk you through that process. So definitely visit our website for any information. Also, if you want to keep up with any updates regarding any changes the DOE is making, we also have those available on our website. All right. So for today's workshop, we are going to discuss how to apply to middle school, high school, any new updates to the application process, the types of programs available, learning how to learn more about schools, and then throughout the presentation, we'll stop to answer some of your questions.
And one thing just to jump in, we got a lot of questions beforehand, which is always so helpful. It lets us know what people are looking for, and we hope to cover almost all of them here. We will, of course, as Karen just said, go through questions and answers at the end. One of the most common questions that we get are very specific questions, like what's a good school for a student with dyslexia in District 22 or something. We can't really answer that, and it's very individual. What we hope to do is show you some research tools where you can try to find out what you can and learn about what your chances are of getting in someplace. And also, for those of you who asked, does a school have a small class, we can show you a little bit about how to research that. But we're not going to be able to answer specific questions. As a survivor of the high school process, as a parent myself, I know it's really stressful, and I totally understand where those questions come from. But unfortunately, it's not something that we can get to in the training. And we're happy to, do our best to answer any other questions during the Q&A.
Thank you, Kim. All right, so new this year. So for this year, unlike past years, you can apply to an unlimited number of programs. Previously, it was only 12 schools or programs. So this year, it's an unlimited number. However, remember to only apply to schools that you want to send your child to. For high school students, you can now see your odds of getting into a school. My school will now show if you have a low, medium, or high chance of getting in, and we'll talk more about this later. And then for middle schools, you can apply to any schools in the city. Just remember that some students will still get priority for in-district schools or zone schools. And just want to jump back to the high schools odds of getting into a school. These aren't applicable to these probabilities don't apply to audition schools, screen schools that require an assessment, transfer schools, or specialized programs for students with disabilities, such as ASD Nest or Horizon, and so on. Okay. So school application facts. New York City has one of the largest school districts. So we have over 400 middle and 400 high schools in New York City. You can search and apply for these schools using My Schools. Schools use different admission methods and priorities. So that's something that you can, when you're on My Schools, look at. And also students are automatically waitlisted at higher ranked schools. So Schools listed on the regular application do not include the specialized high schools or charter schools. Those go on a separate application. Students can apply to multiple programs at the same school, which may increase their chances of getting in. But this year it's unlimited. So if you want to apply for as many schools you can. All right, so some dates to remember. So the middle school application process opened today, and you may apply by the 13th of December. Just remember, well, there's an asterisk on the on December 13th because schools like Mark Twain and D21 schools have a talent test deadline, which is November 8th, and then offers will be made on the 9th of April. Also, the high school application just it opened last week. It started on the 1st of October, and you must apply by the 4th of December. Offers will be made the 6th of March. And then for those interested in taking the SHAZAD, also known as the Specialized High School Admissions Test, must sign up by the 18th of October, and the test will be available November and December, and then offers will be made by March. And then for charter schools, you must apply by the 1st of April. And like Kim said at the beginning, this presentation will be sent out to all of you and includes hyperlinks. So if you are interested in signing up for admissions alerts with the DOE, there's a hyperlink attached to this slide, and there are other hyperlinks throughout the presentation. Okay, so My Schools. Some of you may be familiar with My Schools, some of you may not. You may use My Schools to research schools, RSVP for events, and complete student applications. In addition to using My Schools to complete student school applications, you can also use the My Schools directory to search for middle and high schools. You can just scroll down on the Browse the School Directory and click Start Browsing. And we'll learn more about how to use My Schools later as the presentation continues. Okay. All right, some things to think about during this application process. Seats into bands, how many seats are available to how many people are applying. Schools that have priority groups. Schools where, will offer a wait list by lottery number. For high school students, the chances of offer feature. This is very new, so definitely take that. It's something to think about. And then finally, if you need any help, you can check out the enrollment help website. All right. So, I jumped a slide. So for those that will receive, or not for those, everyone has a lottery number and grouping. So if you go on your My Schools account, this is something that, this is how it will look. We just blurred out the application random number because this is someone else and we don't want to share that information, but this is how it would look on My Schools. And what is a lottery number? So the lottery number will consist of a string of letters and numbers, and so this is just an example of what your lottery number could look like. All right, so now for the new My Schools feature, the chances of offer feature. So high school applicants will now see an icon indicating whether they have a high, medium, or low chance of receiving an offer, similar to a service bar. So 1 bar means 1 bar means low chance, 2 bars means medium, and 3 means high. This is based on the applicant's admissions characteristics, like grades, priority groups, etc. And the DOE has more detailed information about this on their chance of an offer website or webpage. And so again, these probabilities don't apply to audition schools, screen schools that require assessments, transfer schools, or other specialized programs for students with disabilities. And again, this new feature shouldn't discourage you. If you have your mind set on a school and it says that your chances may be low, still apply to it if you want to, but it's just something to take into account when applying for schools this year. All right, so for the process, offers will be made in the spring, March and April. You may be waitlisted at any school listed above your match. You can join a wait list, but you'll be at the bottom, and then you can check for wait lists in real time. So your child's offer letter will include information about any programs where your child is waitlisted. They're automatically on the wait list for any programs listed higher on your child application than the program where they got an offer. So, for example, if your child got an offer to their third choice program, they would automatically be on the wait list for their first and second choice programs. If your child got an offer for their first choice program, they would not be on any wait list. And after offers are available, you can add your child to additional wait lists while they're open. You just may be placed at the bottom of the wait list. All right, so if students or parents are interested in more information, there is a lot of up-to-date information on the DOE website. And so you can click on enrollment by grade, and then go into sections that will, give more information about the middle school application process and the high school application process. All right, so time to get into the middle school admissions process. So some middle schools have more than one program, such as a general education program and a dual language Spanish program. If you're interested in applying to more than one program at the same school, you can. Remember, this year you can apply to as many programs as you'd like, but remember, only apply to ones that you would like to send your child to. All right, so for the middle school admission, so families can now list any New York City public middle school on their application. Just remember that some zone schools will continue to prioritize zone students for seats. Most programs will also have a district priority, which means that seats will be first filled by students and residents of that district. If seats remain, students and residents from other districts will be considered. Many middle school students in New York City attend their zone schools. If you have any zone schools, your child has a priority to them. During the application period, you can log into My Schools to learn if your child has a zone school. Your account will also show the districts where your child can attend district middle school programs. And then, like I said, district programs are open to students in that district. Borough-wide programs are open to all students in that particular borough. And then city-wide schools are open to any New York City student. All right, so middle school admission. So screen schools, some screen, some screen schools, some schools screen for grades or have auditions. And, you can go on My Schools to really look at the admissions criteria for the screen school if you're interested. And then also locations. Some prioritize students in their zone, district, or borough, like I just talked about. There is also diversity admissions. So some schools may prioritize low-income students, multilingual learners, and students in temporary housing. And then finally, there are lotteries for each priority groups if there are more applicants than seats at a certain school. Okay, so now we're going to pause and answer some questions if there are any.
I think I answered the questions. Oh, who wants to speak? Sorry, trying to figure out how to. Can you see who wanted to speak? Okay, here we go. If you can put your questions in the Q&A, it certainly makes it easier. We can answer them live. But that's really helpful. And in fact, okay, if you're putting them in now, that's great. So the bar, we're going to get into that when we talk about the high school features. And we will talk about the Nest Middle School, how the admissions process is different for a program like Nest. Okay. And in general, if you can put your questions in the Q&A, then that helps us, make sure that we're answering everyone's questions in the, the right order and that it's recorded properly. Okay.
Now I'm gonna pass it over to you, Kim.
Yep. So I'll go through high school, and then we will go through some of the details that apply to both processes, which I know the new what are your chances bar is the one that we all have a lot of questions on. But I'll go through the high school process generally, and then we'll dive into some of the things about the special ed programs specifically. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so the high school admissions methods, there's the specialized programs, which are Shazat screened, and that date Karen put in the beginning, I've already forgot, I think it's October 18th. So you'd have to sign up for the test. You can't ask for accommodations on that, and offers on that are based on scores. There's also screened and audition schools. These are some of the most popular schools in the city. And I think it's these schools that they put the tracker into, or for, where you can try to see what are my odds of getting in. They are based on 7th grade core classes average. By core, I mean not, your music and art classes. And the audition schools and the screen schools, they all have different requirements. So some require an essay or an interview or an audition. And you should look on that whatever information is on my schools. And Ed Opt are schools that take a range of students. So they take a mix of academic levels, and some seats are filled through ranking and others are random. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So screened language schools are for multilingual learners, and they look at the time a student has spent in the US and their language proficiency. There are the international schools where some of the students who are newly arrived can go. Transfer schools are for older students. So these are typically students who are older and have some credits, but not what they should have at that point. And there's a range of different criteria and offerings at different transfer schools. Then finally, there's zoned and open schools. Zoned schools are pretty rare in high school. There's only a handful of districts with zone schools in Queens. But if you're interested in a zone school, that will, you could just apply and you could definitely get in. For open, they just take anyone. It's based on your random number. The random number or the random application number, somebody in a question called it a RAN. I actually had not heard that acronym before, but it's the lottery number. So that's what Karen had reviewed earlier. Okay. How do you learn about a school? Okay, so you can go to the next slide. One other thing, I'm sorry, this I think went out of order, but the charter school center is another option. Applications are due April 1st. No, I think I had it in the wrong order, Karen. It's not you. I think it was me. The New York City Charter School Center has the applications for most charter schools, and you can look there if that's something that you're interested in, either for middle or high school. And that's outside the DOE process. Okay, so learning about a school. You can click on the next slide. Okay, so, obviously I think the application processes in New York are very stressful for parents starting from, kindergarten really. It certainly makes sense to think about your chances of getting in. And I know there's a range of opinions about this new what are my chances tracker. And also, to be honest, AFC we can only tell you what we've learned from the DOE, but we don't know if there's nuances to this or ways in which it might not take everything into account. It certainly sounds like it's pretty comprehensive, which is good. On the other hand, I think that you should also think about, first and foremost, what's the right school for my child? And that does not always align with, whether or not a school is considered a super sought after school. For example, Beacon is one of the most sought after schools in the city. I think it's a great program for some kids. It's also a huge program. So if your child really does better with a sort of a smaller school where everybody knows who your child is, that may not be a great fit, right? You have to know who your child is, what their interests are, take into consideration all kinds of things, the size and location, the admissions method, the graduation rate. Obviously, schools with higher graduation rates, you would think have higher academics. Although one thing to keep in mind for my son when we were applying, I got worried about schools that had 100% or 99% four-year graduation rates because I knew my child would take longer. It took him 7 years to graduate high school. And I worried about him being in a school where he would be so much of an outlier and how that would feel. It doesn't mean that I only applied to schools with lower graduation rates. I actually didn't, but it was something that I found interesting and talked to schools about their flexibility and their experience with people who might take longer. You certainly want to look at language, what languages they offer. If your child is multilingual, like whether or not they have a bilingual programming. Sports and clubs are very important, I think, for students. And obviously, it's really important for them to feel like they fit in. It's a big shift from elementary. Accessibility, if that's a concern, we do have a slide on how to figure out if a school is accessible, either for your child or for you. As you may know, far too many New York City public schools are not physically accessible. They're in old buildings, and although they're working on it, it is a slow process. So certainly makes sense to know whether or not a school is accessible. There are ways to ask for them to make a school accessible, but obviously putting in an elevator is not as doable as putting in a small ramp or moving a program from one floor to another. Also, obviously, CTE and job training. What is the school's character? What are they like? And to think about that and what makes sense for your child. Certainly going on, I'm sure many of you have already gone on tours, but to go on tours is a good way to try to figure out what a school is like. Okay, next slide. You can look up information on my schools. I know this is small, but it's, when you look in the actual book, it's different. You can see all those things that I was just talking about. You can click on the different things to see what kind of activities they have. And keep in mind that, schools don't always update this, but you can see the general size, a general overview, and some other information on my schools. Okay, next slide. Oh, and that's where that little asterisk thing that had the red bubble there on the bottom, or the little star, that's where you see the programs, and you have to click on that to get to the information that I think people are very interested in. So now you can go to the next slide, Karen. And this one is for Baruch. It's a very popular school. I highlighted it to show there's a very big difference between the possibilities of you getting in as a general education student versus a student with a disability. And that doesn't mean this is an easy school to get into for any student. There's 28 applications per seat for gen ed students. And they do have a diversity admissions initiative. And as you can see, there's some information about how many students got in who were eligible for free and reduced lunch. This should hopefully all be taken care of or all be accounted for in the 3 bars. So that is supposed to reflect, whether or not your student is a student with a disability, or qualifying student with a disability, I should say, whether or not your student is eligible for free and reduced price lunch or any other diversity initiatives that are there. It's supposed to take that into account. And I think that's important because, as you can see, students with disabilities, it's 5 applicants per seat. So that's, a better ratio for people in terms of getting in. My understanding is that many schools, like if Baruch wants students that are all A students or, however your middle school graded students on whatever scale, if it was all students with 4s or all students with 90, whatever, that a student with a disability might be able to get in with a lower grade point average than a student without a disability, because they try to make sure that the schools don't just take the very top achievers and end up with, not a good mix. If you have a student with a qualifying IEP, who's getting really good grades, you may have better chances than you might have thought of otherwise at some of these schools. But I think the tracker is the thing to look at this year, or I keep calling it the tracker, but the 3 bars. Okay, next slide. So the screening methods. So for middle school, they're based on 4th grade scores. High school are based on 7th grade scores, and you're in a different ranking group based on your core class grades. Okay, next slide. And for the screen language, I think that was in there. That's based on your proficiency in English or your specific language spoken at home. Okay. And next slide. Audition schools are based on your audition. You want to be very careful to make sure you're meeting all the deadlines. All the information should be on My Schools. And they all have different requirements. So make sure you're keeping track of that. Okay. For continuing students, this is something to keep in mind. If you're in a K-8 or 6-12 school, you do have a guaranteed match. So 5th and 8th graders in that situation, certainly you can list that school. It doesn't have to be in your top priority. If there's another school you'd like more, I would list that ahead of it because you're guaranteed to match with this school. Zoned and geographic, it's based on where you live. And actually, this is something that now middle schoolers can apply across the city. There are still some middle schools that have district preference. So in the past, for many middle schoolers, they were not eligible to apply outside their district. Now, some middle schools have district preference. But for any middle schooler, they're eligible to apply across the city. Of course, whether or not you want your 12-year-old to be crossing borough lines is a different thing. But it is an option now. And for high school, there is no district preference. Okay, so specialized programs. These are ones that are outside of the application process. So we do get a lot of questions for these. They have their own method of getting into them. Bilingual ICT or special class. This is something that you can, on the DOE website, there's a page for this, and you can certainly reach out to the DOE, has a specialized email that you can reach out to. You should be talking to your child's IEP team if this is something that's appropriate. They do keep opening up more bilingual programs, which is great. There's still far too few of them. So if your child has a disability and is also not proficient in English, you can ask for a bilingual ICT or special class. And that's outside the application process, and they should let you know. ASD, Nest, and Horizon, these are some of the most popular specialized programs in the city. They're specialized programs for students on the spectrum. That process, there is a whole application process that's on the DOE website. Somebody was asking, how does this overlap with the application process? That was one of the questions in the beginning. It doesn't. It's its own thing. So you definitely should be applying to that. Some people say, well, for example, some schools have an S program and have a program that is, NEST programs are always at schools that have other programs as well. You can apply to both, but I don't know that it's going to bump your chances up. It might, if you don't get into the NEST program and you do get into the other program, perhaps it's a situation where you would think it would be a school that would understand students with autism more. But it's a different application process. ACEs is an inclusion program for students with intellectual disabilities. And that also has grown. And finally, barrier-free schools. This is a different thing, but it is something to point out that if your student needs a barrier-free school, you do have priority. I do not know if I in fact doubt whether or not the new what are your chances bar reflects that. There is a website you can reach out to at the DOE. This should be reflected on your IEP that you need a barrier-free school. And this is for students, not for parents. But that's something that should get you priority at schools so that you can get into them. How do you find out if a school is accessible? You have to look at accessibility on My Schools. There's a number there. It stands for the Building Accessibility Profile. And finally, I would always recommend you visit a school, because some schools that have high scores. In reality, it can be really tricky. This picture is getting really stale, but that's my son on his high school tour at a school that was supposedly fully accessible, but it had a not very well monitored doorbell to get into a door that people didn't answer. So we ended up getting stuck inside on our way out of the building inside a locked place. We did get out, but it's something where I feel like that was a bit of a turnoff for me when I was looking for schools. I think for any group, no matter what disability your child has, going to a school and talking to other parents and trying to get a sense of it is really, really important. Finally, there's diversity in admissions, and many programs have different criteria that they're looking at. So many schools have a diversity in admissions priority for students that receive free or reduced price lunch. Some of them have diversity in admissions for students learning English. And finally, there's some for students in temporary housing. My understanding is that the new, bar system that shows your chances of getting in does take this into account. So we don't have more details than that, but that is my understanding. Okay, so questions. It looks like we have a lot. I don't know if you want to highlight any, Karen, or okay, we did answer the Nest Middle School one live. Okay, so there's no way for us to answer detailed questions about how many students with this level get in. I think that you're going to have to just apply with what you really hope for. And somebody was asking, like, how many students in this tier with disabilities get into these kinds of schools? I know this process is stressful, but that's not an answer that even if they said two, if your child was one of the two that got in, you would want them to get in. So I think that that's the thing that is really hard to answer here. I will tell you, every year on our helpline, we get two kinds of calls that are tough. One from parents that say, oh my God, my child got into a school. It's horrible. And we ask, did you list it on your application? And they say, yeah, at the last minute, the guidance counselor said I needed 12. So I put in the schools that they said I should put down, but I didn't know anything about them. Please don't do that. List as many, many schools as you can, that you would be, obviously there's some schools you highly prioritize over others, and that some that you might be disappointed, but that you could live with. Make sure you list as many schools as you can, but never list a school that you don't know anything about or that you really wouldn't want your child to go to. Conversely, the other kind of call we get is from people who got no match at all, but when we ask them about their application, they listed, Beacon and whatever, like Millennium, like the most sought after schools in the city, and they listed like two of them, or maybe three of them, or they listed, a program, one school, 3 times with different programs. That is a good way to bump your chances up, by the way, if a school has multiple programs. So for example, the High School for Art and Design, you can apply to photography or oh my goodness, art. I'm really rusty at what the different programs are, but there's multiple different programs. If you're open to it, you should apply to all the programs that you think your child might be interested in at a school. That certainly bumps your chances up, but you want to make sure that you're listing as many schools as you can that you would be comfortable with. Because the people that we hear from who don't, and we do hear from people who don't get a match, who did list a lot of schools. I'm not saying this process is perfect, but the ones that I think I always feel really bad for, because it seems like it might have been avoidable, is the people who only list the top tier schools, or the ones who, list a school without knowing anything about it. And that neither of those is a great situation to be in. I know the DOE recommends listing a mix of schools you have a high chance of getting into, a medium, and a low. I don't know enough about the tracker. I think that's a decision that you can only make for yourself. It does seem like it would make sense to list a bit of a range if you are comfortable with it, and certainly list the schools that you're most interested in first. Okay. There's a question about the wait list. The priority, my understanding is there is a priority in the order of people who come off the wait list unless they've changed it. And so you do see where you are in the wait list. Oh, and somebody else is answering that one, sorry. Okay. All right, you know what? I'm gonna leave these and we'll go through the rest of it and see what we can get to, because some of these I think we will answer, and then other ones we can answer at the end. I appreciate all of your questions. If we don't get into all of the answers or aren't able to answer all of your questions, we do have our information for our website where you can write in with questions, or our helpline where you can call. Okay, next slide, Karen. So seats with students with disabilities, I'm sorry, could you go back? Seats for students with IEPs. Yep. Oh, okay. So this is something that we do sometimes get calls about too. I think we have been saying students with disabilities, and that's actually in the programs you can see different seats. It's not actually just students with disabilities. It's only students with qualifying disabilities get this sort of set aside or a different category for the screen schools. So you have to have more than 20% of your classes or special ed, meaning if you had 20 periods of sets, which is very unusual, or ICT, actually I think it's 12 periods of sets, but ICT full-time or a small class, you certainly qualify as a student with a disability for the screen schools and for the separate category of consideration. Conversely, if your child's in gen ed with 5 periods of sets, which is more typical, or with some related services, that does not count. So even if you have 5 periods of sets and 5 periods of OT and speech, that doesn't equal 20%. You can see on your profile whether or not your student qualifies as a student with a disability. It is based on the 7th grade IEP. And we're talking about this for high school because this is where it really does show up, where the screen schools have different criteria. And so if your child has that, has 20% or more of their classes or special ed, then they qualify for the students with disability set aside. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And you can just click through this animation. So I think I just talked through this, but this is an example of more than 20%. Where sets 10 times a week, or a small class for all classes, or ICT. And the other thing where I was saying, if you have 5 times sets and speech, you don't qualify. Okay. So special education admissions. Students with IEPs do apply the same way as other students. I do think one exception to this is that's already come up in some of the questions, but if you're looking at a specialized program like a NEST program or a barrier-free or an ACEs program, that application process as of now is separate from the application process, but you should still go through all of these, the applications in general. Legally, the new school must implement the IEP. And if they're changing your IEP, it has to be based on your child's needs and not the school's program. But the reality of this is different. I'm just going to be blunt. There are far too few schools, high schools especially, that have small classes. So if your child is in a 12-to-1 or a 12-to-1-to-1 in middle school and you're applying to high school, or even if your child is in a 12-to-1 in elementary school and you're applying to middle school, if that new school doesn't have that program, or you're in an ICT and they only have small class, it's more typical that schools have ICTs and don't have small classes, but not all schools have all programs. That's just the truth. And although certainly legally you can fight to have a school create a class program for you, you do not have a right to a particular school. You have a right to the program being implemented on your IEP. So it's a delicate balance for parents. And I always say, try to, no matter what you decide to do, make sure you're going in with your eyes opened about whether or not the program on your child's IEP exists at the new school, and whether or not you think, if not, that you could live with what they might offer. Okay, so next slide. Or, if you're up for like a big battle. One way to look at it, and this is not perfect, I actually don't know if they have the data up for this year yet, but they certainly have it for the end of last year, and they do update it a couple of times throughout the year. This is a very, in the weeds report, but it's one of my favorite reports that's out there, because as you probably know, on my schools, you can't see what kind of program they have. Inside Schools sometimes lists like whether or not a school is good at special ed, or if they have small classes, but that may or may not be up to date. This is the most up to date. It's not real time, it's not live. But you can see if a school has a small class program, or had a small class program or not, and if they had them in all subjects. So you have to click on this, and we will send out these slides to everybody. You click on this link and it opens up, you want to click on detailed school level data, and it opens up a monster Excel file. I would not try this on your phone. I mean, I have done it on my phone, but it's pretty tough to see, because it just lists all the schools. And you want to do Control F or search for that school. It lists all the special classes at the very bottom. If you're great with sorting Excel, you can look and see what schools in this district have small classes, for example. And just keep in mind, some of the things get a little bit tough. Like if you're just, I learned that if you're just scrolling down, like I'm looking in District 1 in Manhattan for PS2, you can see it there. But if PS2 has small classes, which I don't think they do, they would be listed way in the bottom of the spreadsheet in a different way. These are only for D1 through 32 schools. District 75 is supposed to take your preferences into account, but they do not use this application process. You can apply if you think it's possible your child may not be in District 75, but otherwise I would be talking to District 75 placement and asking them what your options are, and advocating in that way, because they do placement outside this process. Okay, so tips for applying. I know we've said this, but I feel like I can't say it enough, because they're some of the hardest calls we get. Only apply to programs you'd be happy to attend, or you'd be willing to attend. I know nothing about this process makes anyone happy. It's a really tough process, so I just want to acknowledge that. But it is important to make sure you'd be willing to send your child to any school you list on that application. And do rank it in the order of your true preferences. Make your last pick a safe school, and look into schools with multiple programs. That's what I was saying earlier about, for example, High School for Art and Design has a lot of different programs that you could apply to. If there's 4 different programs at one school, you can list each one of those on your application, and that helps boost your chances. Okay, next slide. Language access rights and translation and interpretation. You do have a right to this. I think the DOE has gotten better, but there's still a lot of room for improvement. In the top languages, which are listed here, you have a right to it, and in the other ones, they should try to accommodate you. You have a right to translation. It's really important to get that. It can take some time to get your IEP translated, for example, but it's hard enough to understand that for someone whose first language is English. Trying to understand it in a different language is really tough. And they do have to provide professional interpretation for meetings with the schools. So that's important. They can't ask you to bring somebody to, be your interpreter. They need to have a professional interpreter there. For language access complaints or to ask for help, you can call the 718-935-2013 number, or email hello@schools.nyc.gov. Okay. Tips if your child is suspended. You might think, wait, this is the high school, middle school application process. We put this in, especially this time of year. No one plans to have their child suspended. At one point, I ran some data at AFC and learned 8th graders are the #1 group of kids to get suspended. Having gone on a bunch of eighth grade school field trips, I kind of understand why. The kids are sick of the school's sick of the kids, and especially when they're into high school, but it is still a really rough process to go through. And one thing we want to make sure is you have rights. If you remember nothing else and your child does get suspended, please call ASC. You do have rights, like the notices need to be in writing. There's no such thing as out of school suspensions. You can ask for a conference if it's a principal suspension. And for a superintendent suspension, which is the more serious one, make sure you get the packet. They don't always offer that to you, but you have a right to it. And you can see a lot more details about what the allegation is and what they're saying. But finally, call AFC for help if you find yourself in this situation. And finally, this is a survey. If you can take it, we really do read all of them. So if you have questions, or there's topics that you're like, it would be great if you could cover this more in detail. We really do read all of these, and they're very helpful. So please take our survey. It should only take you a minute or two. We really appreciate it. Okay. So I guess we can start going through the questions now. And I'll try to go through the questions that were written in the Q&A first. And then at the end, what we can do is stop recording and answer questions live, if there's still time. Okay. Somebody said, I don't know where we are in the priority ranking. I think it's very hard for us to answer that. You have to look at your lottery number. I would certainly look at the new what are my chances of getting in bar? It sounds like they have done a good job of taking lots of things into account. We won't know until we see what happens this spring, and if people do highlight that there's problems. I know they've been developing it for a long time. And it's a great idea because this process is so complicated for people. Okay. Do you receive multiple high school offers for all the schools you apply to? No, you receive one match. If your match is, I think Karen explained this, but if you receive a match to I'm sorry, with all the schools you list on your application, you receive one match. If you apply to a Shizat school for one of the specialized schools where you have to take the state test, that offer comes outside of it. If you apply to and LaGuardia, which is an audition school, is also a Shizat school, for example. So it is a little bit different. If you apply to one of the specialized programs, like an ASD Nest or Horizon, that offer comes outside. If you apply to a charter school, that offer comes outside. But for all the schools you list on your application, for those schools, you do receive just one match. And if that match is not your top choice, you are waitlisted at the other ones. I certainly would look at the wait list because they do move, and they can move even up until the following fall, which is stressful because you really want to be able to just prepare and know where your child's going. But it's important to look at that because they do move. So, and also in terms of the wait list, you can put your name on a wait list if, let's say, you heard about a school afterwards, or you actually listed it below your match, so you're not automatically waitlisted on. You can add your name to the wait list, but my understanding is you will be on the bottom of the list at that point. Okay, and in terms of high schools that get good reviews from dyslexic families, it's really tough. I would talk to as many people as you can. And it's, I don't have a great answer. The one answer I would say is I think the DOE still has a lot of room for improvement. They do have some more programs for students with reading disabilities and with dyslexia, but they tend to concentrate them on the early grade levels. So I don't have a great answer for that. I would say it's something that you should definitely ask about on the tour, and you can get a sense of things. Okay, somebody asked, what is this 3-bar thing you're constantly referring to? We did have a slide on this, but this is a new feature. And it only applies to high school. So if you're looking at middle school, you can ignore this. But the reason we keep talking about it is for decades when we've been doing these presentations, since the DOE put in screen schools where it's dependent on your grades and other things, people want to know, what are my chances of getting in? This is something that they developed with MIT, with all these engineers, to take all the data they have and crunch it together in some, AI type thing to show you what are let's say, I know I'm picking on Beacon, but what are my chances to get into Beacon, like one of the most sought after schools? And it's definitely not for everybody, so I would put it out there. But, if you have a 1 bar for Beacon, you might still get in, but you might not. And so, that's something to consider. Okay, I might still list Beacon first if it's really my top choice. But I want to make sure I have some schools where I have a 2 bar or a 3 bar. 3 bar means highest likelihood of getting in. And because then that you're more likely to have a match on your application than to be in the situation where you're one of the parents that did not get a match anywhere. If every single one of your schools you list, you have a 1 bar, meaning it looks like a phone battery. If you just have 1 bar, you have low chance of getting in. It does not mean you won't get in. So certainly list it if you're interested in it. But if you can, list some other schools too. Okay. Staff personnel within a school that's appropriate to discuss or explore the ACEs program. I think I would reach out to specialized programs and ask them about that. If there is an ACEs program at a school, you should be able to speak to, there's, specialized teachers there. My understanding is it's not like ASD Nest where there's a central group that coordinates it and supports the instruction. ACEs program is a little bit more school by school. But you should be able to speak with whoever runs the special ed programs there. Sometimes it's an AP, sometimes it's the teacher, sometimes the principals know. Okay. So 8 periods of sets, I don't know. I'm terrible. It depends actually how many I know you're saying 8 periods of sets. Does that qualify you for the student with an IEP? I don't know. It depends on how many periods that middle school has. So for example, I'm not doing the math right off the top of my head, but and middle schools are different. Like some of them have different lengths of classes. So you really have to do the math and see, is 8 over 20% of the classes? I think for most middle schools with 45 minutes, it won't be. But you'd have to do the math. And also really just look on the profile in my schools for your student and you can see, are they listed as a student with a disability or not? If you think it's a mistake, then you should reach out now and try to get that corrected. Okay. And finally, somebody asked if you're applying to Twain for both dance and science. I think Twain is an application process. So it is 2 separate applications, I believe. And the admissions I'm not referring to Mark Twain's priorities specifically. All schools have different admissions priorities, like for example, students in temporary housing, students with free and reduced price lunch. They may have different, for high schools or actually middle schools, they may have different grade level things that they're taking into account for students with who qualify as a student with a disability and general education students. I know this is really complicated. I wish all of you luck in navigating this system. I think the fact that you're here and you're asking such detailed questions is great. The lottery numbers should be posted and you should be able to see it when you log into My Schools, which is how you're going to apply. You would see that lottery number there in the profile somewhere. And if you're having any trouble getting into My Schools, please reach out to the guidance counselor at your school and ask for help, or whoever it is that's helping you at your school with applications. Okay, any other questions before we sign off? Up now is our helpline. It's Monday to Thursday, 10 to 4. If you, sometimes the wait times can be long. If you leave a message, we will call you back. You can also email us in at info@advocatesforchildren.org or on our website. There's actually a form that you can fill out that might be a little bit easier that you can fill out and then let us know what you're writing about. And once again, unfortunately, we can't answer what's the best school for my child. I wish we could, because I understand how stressful this is, but all we can do is try to give you the tools for you to have the questions to ask. Okay, it's like there's 4. Oh, wow, somebody said the My Schools is down. Somehow that doesn't surprise me with both middle school and high school being live. I would keep trying. Yeah, and somebody else said, that's great information, actually. They said it's opening, middle school is opening October 9th. I don't know if you all can see the open questions. But somebody explained that the application will open after school. That makes sense. I mean, they don't say what time on October 9th it comes out. And I do think things are a little bit hectic at the DOE right now. So thank you so much for coming today. Please do fill out our survey. It really does help us. And good luck to all of you.